One of the most controversial Bible passages about marriage says wives should submit to their husbands as the head, and husbands should love their wives. Some people say this passage teaches us about gender differences. Men want respect and women want love. Other people use it to justify abusing or mistreating women, especially if their beliefs or cultures already view men as superior with the right to dominate women. But as I discovered when researching for my book, Good News About Gender, both approaches miss the point. Let's uncover how this passage actually brings us back to the gospel. To understand any message, you need to look at its context. Let's say your mom texted your sister, "Your friend is in the hospital, LOL." Your sister assumes that LOL means laugh out loud, and she is sad that mom's being so mean. To calm your sister down, you ask about the context. Is it a typo? Is the friend a hypochondriac? Maybe your mom kept running into him, and then she saw him again when they both went to visit a sick friend. Finally, you ask your dad, and find out that in their generation, LOL means lots of love. With the right cultural and historical context, a confusing message makes sense. To understand a Bible verse, you also need to look at its context, within the passage, within the rest of the Bible, and in its cultural and historical settings. Let's take a look at the Ephesians passage in each of these contexts. Let's start with the verse, "Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands." In the original Greek, there's actually no verb submit here, but we know that's the intended meaning because of the previous verse. Verse 21 provides the thesis statement for the passage, which the next verse then applies specifically to wives. But submitting to one another doesn't apply only to wives. The rest of the passage applies this command to each specific group. By looking at the grammar and the structure of the passage, we discover that the point of the passage is how in each of these relationships, both sides submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Next, let's look at the cultural and historical context. Paul wrote this letter in Greek to a Greek-speaking audience. When Paul mentioned wives, husbands, children, fathers, slaves, and masters, his audience would have immediately recognized that he was using a popular Greek genre, the household code. Greek philosophers wrote household codes describing how men should manage their household affairs. One of these philosophers was Aristotle. He lived several centuries before Paul, but his ideas continued to influence the Greco-Roman world and even our society today. Aristotle's household code says, "Of household management we have seen that there are three parts. One is the rule of a master over slaves, another of a father, and the third of a husband. Although the parts of the soul are present in all of them, they are present in different degrees. For the slave has no deliberative faculty at all. The woman has, but it is without authority, and the child has, but it is immature. So it must necessarily be supposed to be with the moral virtues also. All may be supposed to partake of them, but only in such a manner and degree as is required by each for the fulfillment of his duty." According to Aristotle's household code, a man was created to rule over his wife, children, and slaves, because he is the only one who can think or have morals. The rest don't fully have souls. Household codes like Aristotle's influenced the culture in Paul's time, so Paul decided to write his own remix. It's an ingenious parody, intended to show how different Christian households should be from the culture of the day. Paul includes the same characters, but the man doesn't lord it over the others. Instead, everyone submits to Christ. Instead of talking only to the man about how to force everyone to obey him, Paul talks directly to each member of the household. He appeals to their relationship with Christ and promises spiritual rewards, based on the assumption that all humans created in God's image have souls and will be held accountable for their own moral choices. In every household relationship, Christians must submit to each other. So Paul tells the culturally powerful men to submit 3 times more than the rest of the household. What a shock for them! But what about the husband being the head of the wife? Doesn't that still emphasize hierarchy? Not necessarily. Even if the husband is the head, he's part of the same body as his wife. Here's where other Bible context comes in handy. In the previous chapter of Ephesians, Paul emphasized how all Christians are part of one body, Christ's body. But husbands and wives are even more unified. In his instructions to husbands, Paul quotes from Genesis 2, emphasizing that in marriage, a husband and wife become one flesh as their bodies reunite. Jesus also quotes this passage when he talks about divorce. Being one body has radical implications. For instance, where I grew up in Tanzania, both men and women farm, but women also gather firewood, cook, clean, and watch the kids. My friend explained how a man will tell a woman to fetch him something, and if she doesn't, he'll say, "You're my wife, so you'll obey me as the head." But if he's the head, he's part of the body. To stretch one of Paul's other metaphors, if your stomach growls with hunger, will your mouth tell it to be quiet, or will your mouth eat something? So if a husband is the head, he should love his wife as his own body. For example, he should feel her exhaustion as his own and step in to help, which is how my Tanzanian friend loves his wife. While the application of submission may look different for each spouse, Paul's main aim does not seem to be discussing difference, but instead radically countercultural unity and mutuality. So how do we apply this message today? Paul's challenge to us is that Christian families should look different from the culture around us. How can you serve your family members out of love and reverence for Christ? Inspired by Paul's example, we can also ask, who does my culture assume is inferior? How can we as Christians challenge these views and live instead in mutual submission under Christ? And that's why Ephesians 5 is actually good news about gender. The content for this video comes from my book, Good News About Gender, which is an interactive Bible study guide packed with activities, discussion questions, videos, songs, and more. One of them is the spoken word linked right here. To discover even more, get your copy of the book off Amazon. The link's in the description. And don't forget to subscribe!